So, from a transition of topics, Chris, as I said, runs the retail industry group. So we're going to kind of hear some perspectives from that lens, whether for the audience, whether you're in the retail industry or not. I think we all have learned for sure that any business in any industry is kind of impacted from that. And every industry is trying to kind of learn something from each other in terms of what they're doing to react and recover and leverage data analytics. So looking forward to the conversation. Chris, if you wouldn't mind, take a quick moment to give an introduction of yourself. I haven't done it justice at this point.
No, sure, that's fine. So I lead our U.S. based within Microsoft U.S. Retail and consumer goods practice with inside of what we call enterprise commercial. And that's a mouthful, I guess. And what that means, to demystify that, is a bit that the team that I have identifies and look at trends within the retail and consumer goods industry and helps our customers realize those with in whatever stage they're at along their digital transformation journey. Mostly, our focus is going to be the top 500 retail and consumer goods across the U.S. So at breadth, at scale, across many different sub-verticals within that. So consumer goods, home improvement, electronics, C-store, QSR, casual dining. I'm sure I missed or forgot one or two in there, but those are the general sectors that we cover within the industry.
All right, great, thank you. And I know from your background, you've been with Microsoft for quite a long time. I think maybe 15 years plus, something like that. So you've been through and seen a lot. And I've said this to just about anybody that knows me in the professional world, but I've been very excited to be a partner of Microsoft's a lot due to Satya Nadella and the things that he's done there from a cultural perspective. So if you want to weave any of that in, I just personally think he's a great guy and had a great strategy. But yeah, if you can maybe kind of unpack where you went there a little bit further, right? Like how do you view the retail industry? How do you kind of break it out into different chunks and groups? I think right now, obviously getting a sense of this whole essential versus non-essential, which everybody's kind of aware of the terms now more than ever, and just kind of how you break things down, how you're working to help the brands that you work with to understand where they're at and how they're going to map towards recovery.
Sure, yeah. So a few things to cover there. Just as mentioned, go back. I'm probably not quite at 15 yet, but I do appreciate. I think they'll give me a statue or a crystal of some kind that will come through when I cross the threshold. Yeah, I have been here for a minute. I spent so I've been leading this practice for the last 3 years. Before that, I spent 5 Black Fridays in our Microsoft retail store, so our direct channel, as CTO there. So think it's, if you haven't been into one of our stores, specialty boutique, consumer electronics focused. A smattering of roles before that inside of Microsoft. And prior to that, I did 6 years over at Hewlett Packard, half engineering, half category management sell-through. And then before that, PepsiCo. So that sort of rounds out, when I say PepsiCo, I mean PepsiCo bottling. So a distributor from rounding out consumer goods to retail, at least from the avenue that we have. And then obviously inside of Microsoft, we're both a consumer goods company where we sell a lot of product through Walmart, through Best Buy, through many of our customers. We're also, as I mentioned, a direct channel. We've got about 80 stores globally, about a $5.2 billion business from that side. And I think if you look at both our direct and indirect channel, we're sitting somewhere around, I think, 12 to 15 billion. And then obviously the enterprise business that we support, which supports many of our customers. As you mentioned, Satya, yeah, he's been a great change agent, and we definitely have seen through this that change and culture starts at the top. So that growth mindset is something that's been delivered and driven inside of Microsoft, and one that has seen definite change in how we evaluate ourselves, how we work together within teams, and how we approach our customers and market with that learning mentality. So growth mindset's definitely of top focus, and I think we can get into some of that as we talk about, I think if you heard, Satya has mentioned the the three stages of the three pillars that we look at with regards to the market, right? So there's the reacting, recovering, and reimagining. And if we break that down a little bit more, the reacting piece of that is, navigating the now, right? And so a lot of companies and people, as we look at the market, are definitely navigating that now. And as we see that, across all sorts of different verticals, from essential to non-essential, I'll get into that piece in a minute. The four things we're seeing, clearly are standing up of crisis centers and crisis responses. I think one of the best I've seen out there today is 7-Eleven, where they have a massive franchisee development. So they have their own corporate standards that they have to deliver. They're an essential business because they deliver food, yet they also have a role to support the franchisees that live and die every day based on the revenue that they can drive and support, and then the communities that they support that they're attached to. So it's very important to them to build this center of excellence that align to their values, but also can support and give them the context and guidance that they need. And so we've partnered with them to, if you think about all the changes to state, local, Fed, brand, policy, all of those that are changing, nearly by the minute, centralizing around a central repository for that data. If you think about virtual assistants, AI, chatbots, virtual concierge is the ability to answer, to put one answer out there at a time and have many people interact and answer those as they go through. So definitely seeing that as part of this area. Protecting of employees and customer safety, that's also 1 and 2. I put that together as a flip side of a coin, because giving consumers and customers that confidence that your employees are safe and that they're set up, and as well as not just that piece within PPE, but digital PPE, right? How do you give confidence and audit that you have the right requirements around gloves, around masks, around plexiglass, around support to help reduce any contagions that are out there today. So 1 on the employee side and 2 on the customer side. I think you've probably seen, if you've gone out to any grocer, it's widely varied as far as what's approved and what's not approved and what they can supply and what they can't. So there's definitely an investment in that and a continued investment in that as we operate. I think we flipped from the point was to land people in stores, spend more time there and give them a great experience, to now do as much as we can to deliver products and goods outside of stores, limit the time in stores, yet still giving that great experience both digitally and physically. And that gets to reorienting of the business, right? To amplify the digital, to optimize inventory, to strengthen supply chains. I'm not sure if you guys have seen in the market, there's different ways that we're talking about this moment. So in 1929, we're familiar with the Great Depression. In 2008, due to the Lehman Brothers fall, I think we're very, we remember the Great Recession, and a lot of markets are talking about this being the 2020 COVID-19, the Great Acceleration. Right? So that's this idea, and I'm sure you've heard, William Gibson's quote, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. So those who have invested and hardened in their digital practice will be those that are successful and not just able to react, but plan their recovery and shape that new normal. A couple of stats on that, right? E-commerce growth in the U.S. penetration since 2009 has been roughly around 1%, right? Year over year, we've seen roughly, and in the last year, 2018 and 19, that almost got to 2% growth, from about 14% to about 14.4 to 16%. In the last 8 weeks, right? E-commerce impact, right? U.S. penetration has gone almost double, from 16% to 27%. We thought that would be on a scale 5 years out. So when we talk about this acceleration and the digital acceleration, that is true. And you can see that across many different stats. Grocer apps are up 100 to 200% as far as sales go. We expect a lot of that to be permanent. In this segment, online sales, specifically on grocers, 20%, it grew after social distancing guidelines came through, but post-stimulus checks, it jumped as high as 40%. Digital meals, so if you look at social distancing there, those went up 25 to 100%. But after the stimulus checks, that went as high as 100 to 200%. DoorDash being 200% of that, with Uber Eats being 148. If I flip to the online market for apparel, Stitch Fix has had 62% of that market, but overall it's dropped about 15. But if you look in companies like, let's say Lululemon, who've been anchored and ready to move as Stitch Fix has, they've grown 200%, capturing 22% of that market. So shoppers definitely prefer that contactless touch in store, have adopted and moved to e-commerce practices. And consumers will say that about 85% of consumers say they're going to continue that focus moving forward past COVID. So of the three pillars, I touched on one. I'll pause there, Brian, to see if you have any questions before I go to, part 2 and 3, which is the comeback and the new normal.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to derail you too much from continuing down those two parts, but so much of what you said, I'd love to circle back on. But the one, right, I think you phrased it, the great acceleration. So if my assumption is, big organizations, big retail brands that had that kind of in full swing prior to this, but moving at a moderate pace, just found themselves accelerating it because of this. Are there any kind of two questions, go whichever direction you like. Are there any kind of thoughts you have maybe for other retail organizations where it wasn't fully bought into, it wasn't kind of in motion, and that maybe they felt some of it, like we got more done more quickly to change and transform, but we want to keep that going? Or kind of same question, what do you see those folks where that happened, it was in that react phase, right? It just happened. They had to get things done, so they did it and they accelerated. Now that we're 2 months in, what are they doing and thinking of to make that continue and to kind of keep that pace going?
Yeah, so there's in that stage of navigating now, and I would say while some of those larger customers had that, you would say some of that fuel and engine, I'd hazard to say that they dabbled in it, right? Like when you look at sales, as I mentioned, as a percentage of your sales, if I just take e-com as an example, if 16% of the market, right, roughly, and that's going to be smaller or bigger depending on the business, is online and how you fulfill and deliver on curbside or any of those avenues, it didn't get a lion's share. You might have done it because your competitors did it and you wanted to provide offerings to that perspective, and it's a growing business to look at. But there wasn't, it just, from a perspective of those large industries, it wasn't as big a focus. This doubled down on those initiatives. So the transition and investment to digital, to online, to predictive capabilities, to cognitive services have just ramped right across those areas, from, I think, innovation projects, from ideals, from, we'll get there in about 5 or 6 years, to, if we are going to survive, we have to deliver and execute against this right now. And it's a challenge if you look at non-essential versus essential, right? In the essential world, they almost have a problem. I think 8% stockouts were the average on shelves previously. Now those numbers have jumped to 280% as an average, if we think about some of those things that are out there on shelf today. So shelf analytics, hardening of your supply chain, and just even there are presidents out stocking shelves in their stores. There are executives out, throwing product into trucks today, right? Just trying to keep up with demand. So, they've got one problem is where am I and how do I focus just on my core business and how do I evolve? Then you have the non-essentials, which, if you've seen what JCPenney just announced, I think, bankruptcy a day or so ago. Neiman's is very close. If you think about Nordstrom, REI, their sales have shifted from apparel to more equipment. Or Gap, for example, those companies have furloughed, have paused, has closed, and they really have to in this time of noise, that there's obviously a contraction and a shrinking of revenue, but you have to plan and adjust for your comeback. So while the stores are closed, we've seen some companies harden and look at things that they weren't able to do, like upgrade or change to point of sale. I think GameStop is a great example of this, where their business has skyrocketed because, as people stay home, the online gaming business has tripled. And there was a strong concern from them of how much their digital practice versus their in-store practice will look like. So while you have this time down, there's definite acceleration and hardening of infrastructure and your forecasting models that weren't there today, where this massive COVID thing came through and blew up your market. which is kind of
Yeah.
getting to plan comeback, right? So this building of recovery strategy, rethinking business portfolios, accessing market opportunities and identifying those. That's what people are starting to enter into now. And it's been unfortunate that those non-essentials, it's funny, have had a little bit of more time to accelerate versus the essentials, which have just been slam and are fulfilling. They'll start to come out of this. I would say probably a month or two later before we get to shaping the new normal. And that new normal, as reimagine, is going to be about what you're talking about, is accessing shifts, putting digital at the center of the relationship, ideate on how we evolve products and services, and then really plan for that long term. COVID phase 2 could be, here next fall. If this mutates and stays in that avenue and becomes, what we call the new normal, right, there will be some adjustment, right? And as we've hardened both essential and non-essential, those pieces will definitely be prevalent.
Yeah. You mentioned the gaming thing back there. My investment strategy internally for my family definitely shifted a lot with my son during the COVID crisis around gaming. Apparently, it's cool to get desktop computers now, which I just thought was odd, but so he's excited about that.
The gaming platform is definitely interesting, right? I've never been a Fortniter, but my two boys have trained me up over the last 2 months. So while I'm still not nearly as good as I'd like, I'm getting better. So our internal family dynamics around the TV and gaming has definitely increased.
It is very interesting, and I could tell a whole story about the whole Travis Scott doing his in-game virtual concert on Fortnite, which was just crazy. And of course, I'm sitting there talking to my son about all the downstream business implications of it, and he's like, "Dad, just stop, please, leave me alone." So you kind of shifted in, to those other two phases, your pillars and recovery, right? So what, I think it's table stakes at this point that everybody's trying to get a feel for when we'll open back up and when we'll recover, but no one knows for sure. You mentioned kind of the relapse, if you will. So there's a lot of uncertainty there. What are the few core areas a retailer's focused on right now to say, look, there's only so much I can control and focus on. So when I talk about recovery, I'm using data analytics or whatever, and this is what I'm focused on because this is what I can control.
Mm-hmm. Sure. There's 4 areas that we're looking at that right now, right? So the 4 areas within non-essential and essential retail, and I'll talk about that. So that's 1. Employee needs evolving is 2. E-commerce demand is 3, and supply chain needs are 4. So I'll kind of go into to all 4 of those for a second. The essential retail, right? So at that, I mean, we've seen and heard, and I touched on this before. So curbside pickup has become number 1 in the market, right? If you didn't have, we call BOPUS, BORUS, we're now, so that's buy online, pick up in store, buy online, return in store. People have dabbled in that. We're now calling it BOPAC, buy online, pick up at curb, right? Did you have the infrastructure to allow for that before? If so, right, how do you recognize and identify customers that come within your proximity or your environment? And then how do you deliver that directly to them in a way that's both safe and environmentally secure? The ship to home services, and grocers will talk about this. The largest cost to, if one is curbside, so you want to draw people close, which reduces some of those shipping costs. But the ship to home, the Instacarts, the Grubhub, the Uber Eats, right? A lot of folks have stepped into that water and leveraged that or taken that shot in the arm with those services and those disruptors. But they're all operating at a loss right now, right? Just similar to Uber, right? It's a disruptive solution that they brought in at loss. And retailers who have adjusted to that and picked up those social, those ship to home services, the fastest growing part of their business at this point is yielding the lowest amount of return. I think we did a study with Publix not too long ago that went through, and I think we saw the Instacart strike that they didn't impact Instacart, it impacted Publix. All the negative Twitter feed went directly to them that their products weren't being delivered that the customers needed. And that margin that Instacart takes effectively makes online ordering and shipping a net revenue loss. So your fastest growing business that you've anchored yourself to is coming through it at a loss leader. In 6 years, you'll be out of business. So we talk about it and help retailers and consumer goods companies understand that your data, your customer relationship, that ownership, while it takes an initial investment and pickup, is for the long term in your advantage. I've got a whole series around how to look at that piece. And then as you step through social distancing apps like booking certain times in stores, when can I attend versus when can't I? What do the lines look like? What type of health factors are around this area versus this store? All bleeds into autonomous shopping as well. What can I pick up and pull and order on my own versus adjusting to employees? That moves into the employee section of reshaping and organizing. So digital concierge, virtual assistants, new standards for physical folks that are out there. Just in our own retail stores, if I talk about our direct channel for a minute, we closed stores on March 16th. And since then, what we've been able to enjoy in Microsoft is opposite of other retailers, 70% of our business is through e-com and through that channel versus about 30% is within our stores. So as we shifted, our employees are able to, I think we had 317,000 enterprise customers and have delivered 4,000 training sessions to them. So they've been able to talk about how we and what we've done and the products and technologies we use to enable many of our customers across, as we mentioned, the modern workplace, their enterprise stature, things of those nature. Just in reference, before that, across 8.5 months, it was just about those same numbers. So it's ramped up, and we've been able to apply them in, our support tickets for our online calls, so and in our demand centers and our fulfillment centers. So we've been able to pivot and transition from a store closure to other areas. And we think about swapping, it's important for, there's this demand of essentials that's got this demand of business and these furloughed business of non-essentials. How can we better tie up and connect those employees? If I move over then to e-commerce, we talked about, we talked a little bit about before, subscription services is in there. Commerce and fraud is a big one. I think there's a percentage of about 2 to 3% of the market is impacted by e-commerce sales. And now that that's grown, that's a much larger percentage of business. So we look at and we adjust and we talk about how can we better push through the valid orders that are coming in, recognize and understand customers through that versus rejecting those and rejecting the right ones. And that's yielded some pretty valuable responses. I think we see about 10% increase in sales in that on any business. And then finally, when we look at supply chain leads, and that blending of all this together, product visibility, intelligent control towers, pricing, forecasting, this is where a lot of the predictive models and analytics for us start to come into play. I mean, data underlyingly supports all these pieces of your decision. So how the models and the forecasting models and the machine-based learnings have definitely been thrown a whack of this. Very few of those have continued to move. And as we constantly train and update and look at the models of what those pieces look like, how would a second pandemic look? We now have hardened data on that. What would we look through an adjust and change? What leading market indicators can you bring in across, where does China sit? What type of demand does it look like out in the Fed for interest rates? What does hotel occupancy rates start to look like? What does sporting events start to look like? How do we adjust and factor into this new normal? And how do all those key indicators fit into the models to better predict what we think our forecasting trends will be? In certain cases, post-stimulus check, post-COVID, we've been able to put a few of those things together and still, in retraining the models, get back to I'd say high 95 to 97% accuracy.
Yeah, so somewhere Brian Beasley is trying to unmute his his microphone and say yes, what he said. I've heard him mention a lot of different angles on we've got to retrain everything, right? There's totally different data sets that we've got to look at when we're talking about prediction. Let me ask this, since you were just talking about that digital, if there's anybody I know that's got the closest thing to a crystal ball in the retail space, when you talk about e-com and digital and BOPAC, I think, or BOPUS, I'm not sure, those kind of things, if I'm a retailer that I wasn't there, right? So like the last couple of months, I wasn't there. I wasn't able to kind of capitalize on it the way I wanted to. I'm working on pivoting, but now we're at this juncture, right? Two and a half months in. What are your thoughts? Do you feel like, hey, you've got to stick with it, whether it's because of the potential relapse or just that's where it's going now, new norm, whatever buzzword, or is there hey, let's focus on my core and kind of not that digital and delivery channel, and just focus on getting that built back up. Yeah, I would imagine a lot have got to have a question of, is this kind of a reactionary in the moment type of thing, or is it where things are going to be now?
The acceleration is there across the board, and the consumers, as we said, we've seen this trend in adoption to digital, and 85% of them say that they're going to stay with that, right? So your consumer demand has now shifted in how they're reacting with each of the brands that they do today, right? It definitely depends on what I'll say is sector or sub-industry. So if I'm food service, if I'm grocery, right, to a degree apparel, that there are certain things that, I think are still require brick and mortar, right? To what degree? Like, I'm still going to like to feel a couch. I'm still going to like to feel a bed, right? And I may try on certain things. Like, my wife and I very much differ. She orders a lot of, product from Zulily for shoes and other products. I've got to try it on and feel it. Even though I know I can return it, to me, it's worth that piece. So there's certain things that will still have an in-store touch, and your core business will stay, but it's definitely shifting really quickly with, as I mentioned, food delivery, grocers, all those where people prefer and have found the great ease and value of that ordering online and getting that BOPUS, Boris, or BOPAC pieces. So those shifts have accelerated and definitely would be here to stay. As the non-essentials come back into the market, right? I don't think we have enough data just yet to determine where and how much of that will shift. But I believe, right, that at least 50% of that will move back, will move over. So as mentioned, people have dabbled and they have certain components in e-commerce and have built these up over the last couple of years at a slow or innovation pace, or at a science experiment pace. But here, those type of pieces are becoming hardened just as much as your point of sale is, just as much as your marketing organizations deliver. Like, these aren't science experiments or innovations anymore. This great acceleration, as we talk about, are the market and consumers have gotten used to this and want to see that move forward. I think what's really interesting for me is how consumer goods companies will adjust to subscription-based services or direct services. Lion's share of their customers are the grocers, are the C-stores, all the restaurants. But how will a Pepsi, how will a Mars, how will a Coca-Cola, how will a Procter & Gamble adjust to a lot more of these online orders? How much of that percentage will change in the channel for their customers, the retailers, versus that direct model? Because I think them building brand affinity and connection with their consumers is definitely the next wave of focus.
Awesome. Well, unfortunately, we're just about done with time. I can't thank you enough, especially taking time off your day off. Maybe one quick parting thought. If I'm a leader and executive in a retail organization, be it a book, a blog, a person, I don't know, any last kind of word of advice? There's all these things we talked about, just one key thing. Hey, here's something you can leverage that can help.
Yeah. Well, one thing. We ran out of time and I run through 12, right. But I mean, I think there is there's been some investments in this area. Double down on your digital, double down on hardening and digitaling your acceleration, right? You might have played with, dabbled with, looked at your predictive models, gone through analytics, touched on AI, only, maybe piloted it in a few stores. Double down on that. Right? That investment, right, while difficult in some cases right now, will yield spades as we come out of this new normal. And as we shape and plan, make sure you've planned the comeback and harden that comeback, because this new normal will continue. The old world's gone, and it will continue to adjust as, if the next wave comes in the fall or if it doesn't, but consumer behaviors have changed, their appetites have changed, and make sure that, be relevant, because we've seen giants in the market right today fall in and out, and we don't, we definitely want to see our best brands stay there as giants, right?
No doubt. All right, man. Well, hey, I really appreciate it.